Welcome to Beyond Rent, the property management podcast brought to you by Rent Manager. Each episode, we sit down with an expert to talk industry updates, tech solutions, and top tips for those in the property management space. And now, let's get to the conversation and go Beyond Rent.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Beyond Rent. Keeping a pulse on the industry is really important. We have to stay ahead of trends. So to keep up with the pace of business, we have Vanessa Anderson, who is with Showmojo and Tenant Turner, joining us in studio today to talk about what's going on in our industry. Vanessa, welcome to Beyond Rent.
Thanks for having me, Joe. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a really fun conversation. I know that Showmojo puts out some data, some stats, some trends that we want to dig into and learn a little bit more about so we can understand really what's going on out there so people can make good business decisions on how they operate. But before we jump into that, let's get to know you a little bit better. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Vanessa Anderson. I'm CEO at Tenant Turner and Showmojo. A little bit about my background. I really grew up in an entrepreneurial household, in a household that is interested in investing in real estate. And so that really resonated with me and something that took me through my career. So it was really, my dad owns two businesses. He has a family law firm and then a real estate brokerage. And so starting at age 11, he put me to work, which I hope I'll be able to do to my children one day, is put them to work, because it's the best learning lesson you can have. So at 11, he had us answering his phones. He had us helping him with his marketing. And then later I went on to run all of his QuickBooks for his rental portfolio. So he always had single family rentals. So managing those really, it stuck with me. And so when I went off to school, when I was just drawn to this tactile investment class of real estate, and started my career on the institutional side. So I worked at two real estate private equity funds, split my time between acquisitions and asset management, and then transitioned to tech about 13 years ago now. And that was really just, I loved real estate, I loved the investing, but it's can be an industry that is slow to evolve. We've come so far in the 13 years since I switched to tech. But at the time, I was very frustrated with the lack of adoption of technology, lack of scalable operational practices. And so that's what drove me into tech. So then I spent a number of years at early stage venture-backed tech companies. And then really post-pandemic, I was at Guaranteed Rate, the mortgage lender, and then joined PropertyTek about 2 years ago as COO and stepped into the CEO role last fall.
Thanks for that in-depth background there. I love hearing how people get started in things. And so many people tell me it is family.
Yes.
Right? There's this deep connection with what my parents did, or they were involved in real estate. They were even sometimes just a real estate agent, or they worked in property management, and now it's kind of their foot in the door, as it were. But starting out at such a young age, I would have to think, you already mentioned it, the lack of technology that you experienced at that age versus where we're at today is wild.
It's wildly different. Well, and so to your point, Joe, about how much family influences. So my dad had the law firm and then the real estate brokerage. He was always like, it's me and my sister. There's two of us. And so he was always like, girls, don't become a lawyer. He was like, just don't be a lawyer. So my sister is a lawyer.
Of course, right?
And then I went into real estate. But that really shows you like how impactful that is, right? That both of us could have pursued any career, and both of us took a path that was very much related to what we learned growing up and how impactful that can be. So
yeah, absolutely.
But to your point on where real estate technology was, when I was in institutional ownership, we did everything in Excel. So I'm great at Excel. I still, like, our CTO wants to get me a Mac, and I'm like, no, I need a PC because I'm really good at Excel. Like, I can't let it go. But we used very little technology. I think we used Argus, and it looks like, something that Doogie Howser had running in the back at the time.
Yeah.
But like very, very old school and very limited, really very limited software to make our investments and to maintain those investments and to eventually look at selling them. Virtually all Excel at the time.
So working with family, with your dad at such a young age, I'd imagine there have to be things that have just stuck with you as you progress in your career that you keep looking back and saying, hey, that life lesson really changed who I am.
Yeah. I think the core thing with working for family is that what I learned is nothing is below or above you, right? Every strategic decision needs to be made. And so that's taught me to move forward, make hard decisions, and keep moving. You can't just defer it. And on the flip side, nothing is beneath you. There's no task where you can say, no thanks, that's not for me. The trash needs to be taken out. The data needs to be entered. The mail needs to be sent out. Whatever it is, as a small business owner, you're responsible for it. And so I think that, taking that deep responsibility with me into my career has been huge in terms of teaching me how to work and be successful and be entrepreneurial.
I love that. I think that is kind of who we are at our core. Our owner kind of feels the same way, and I see him live that out. And I think it sets culture when you act that way, and it allows everyone to feel like they're important, but also know that they're never alone, no matter how big or small the task is.
Yeah.
So it sounds like your dad's a great man and really set a really good
lead
example.
by example culture, right?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Well, let's talk, let's get into the topic, right? So we're here to talk about trends in the market. And what I understand is PropertyTek, they own both ShowMojo, Tenant Turner, that are leasing platforms. And through some of the data that you have with ShowMojo, you are able to kind of talk about trends and what you're seeing out in the market. And so I'm really interested in learning more about that today. So let's do that. Let's talk about that. But first of all, I want to ask, why do you create this report? Like, why is it important to look at this data and really pick apart what it's telling us?
Yeah. I think when I think about the quarterly data talk, I think of it as the efficiency playbook for your leasing operations. So we take insights from it's 1.3 million leased units, 23 million scheduled showings, and I think it's now 76 million leads. And it's something like 670 million customer interactions, so emails, texts, phone calls. And we break that down into actionable insights so that, when you look at your leasing operation, you can say, I can do these three things in order to be more efficient and reduce my days on market. So ultimately, it's how do you make your leasing operation as efficient as possible and as fast as possible in order to make the most out of every single lead. And that this is really the playbook for that efficiency.
I love that word efficiency, especially lead efficiency, right? So all these leads are coming in, you see all the data, you understand there's plenty of leads, right? But what are you doing with it? How do you make sure you're moving those through the system appropriately? So you create this data quarterly, which is really exciting because then you can kind of look quarter after quarter and kind of understand what's happening. Let's jump in. What are some of the things that you're seeing that you want to talk about today?
Yeah, I think there's a few categories of KPIs to look at when you think about the leasing market. So the first one is days on market. So days on market is going to tell you how fast things are moving. Fast, either very fast when things are good or very slow when things are a little softer. It's also very correlated to vacancy rate. So what we saw at the end of 2025 is the highest days on market that we have seen in our entire data set, which goes back through 2017. So we saw days on market hit 47 days in fourth quarter. And essentially, we had a low point at the end of the pandemic. So you saw really low days on market in 2021 and the lowest in kind of key leasing season 2022. Every single year since, we've seen this increase in days on market as things are getting softer and softer and harder out there for PMs. I would say like the one silver lining on the days on market stat is that the rate of essentially worsening is starting to decrease. So yes, days on market continue to go up, but at a less dramatic rate than they have in the past. So hopefully that means we're just going to start this plateau. So days on market is our first indicator. Our next would be just sheer volume, right? So leads and showings per listing. So leads, both leads and showings are at an all-time low as well. So that correlates to that days on market. You have fewer leads, you have fewer showings, you're going to be on the market longer. So in fourth quarter, we hit leads per listing of 35 leads per listing and showings of 18 showings per listing. That's nationwide on average. So, of course, all this data, you have to take into consideration your local submarket and the activity there. But basically what that's showing is that right now, in today's market, you cannot rely on sheer volume in order to move your space. So when things are good, you're like, I have 55 leads. In a matter of 2 weeks, someone's going to put in an application. So now when you have fewer leads, you have to make the most of them, right? You really have to work them through your funnel and go from that lead to a showing to an application and get more efficient all through that funnel. And so I think the third major macro KPI is rents. So rents are flat. That's the punchline here, is that in our data set, we've seen 8 consecutive quarters of flat rent, and that's cut by median or average. Our data does not take concessions into consideration because that's in an unstructured field. So if you're in a market that is offering 1 free month rent, et cetera, rents are likely down when you take that into consideration. So it is quite soft. So I think if you take, those 3 metrics, days on market, volume of leads and showings, and then rental rates, it paints this picture that it's really, really tough out there. And so the key thing here, and the last stat that we always report on, is conversion. So conversion from a lead to a scheduled showing is our North Star at ShowMojo and Tenant Turner. It's the KPI that we're always trying to optimize for our customers. So our customers, we only have data on our customers, not anybody else's, saw conversion rates in the mid 50% the last 3 quarters. So I think like 52 to 56% on average from a lead to a scheduled showing. And that number is up 12 or 13% over the last 3 or 4 years, which means that our platform is getting more and more efficient at moving leads through the funnel. So I think that's really the key here, is how do you enhance that conversion rate? And I think the silver bullet is speed to lead. 65% of renters sign a lease with the first property to respond to them. And so how do you do that without working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? So I think automation is key here, and that's will help you drive that conversion rate up.
So a lot of great stats. It's really interesting when you talk about how days on market is the worst, right, that you've seen. However, it's the level of worsening is slowing. It's a little bit of the same conversation around inflation, right?
Yeah.
Right. So like people say, well, inflation is down. Well, it's still up. It's
still
just
up.
not up at the same rate that it was prior, right? Which is a good sign. And hopefully we continue to see that not get any worse and maybe kind of revert back and kind of go the other direction.
Yeah.
From, I believe you said 47 days. So I think that's really interesting. And then when you talk about rents being flat, I'm glad you addressed concessions, because I was going to ask a little bit of like, well, what's happening in the market? What's happening with concessions? What are people doing? Because typically when you do have days on market that are higher, and rents are flat, you have to do something, right? Most people do not want to lower rent. That's kind of going the wrong direction. We don't like doing that. So concessions start coming into play. Yeah. And I do hear that concessions are up significantly compared to what we saw, 4 or 5 years ago.
Well, we had this is anecdotal, so it's not backed by the hard data.
Yeah.
But anecdotally, we had so many requests for concession functionality that we now have a flag across photos when you're offering concessions, and we have an ability to boost specials. So that was a request from customers, which means if they're asking for that enough for it to be prioritized in our development backlog, people are in need of this, and they are heavily offering concessions. Oh.
Yeah, and until that days on market starts to drop, that's not going to change, right?
Yeah. So, you're not going to raise your rent when your days on market continues to go up, right?
Yeah, you just can't, right?
Yeah.
It's just not even a possibility. And and I don't know, when you look at the trends and look at the data, how far do you start looking into like what's informing that data, meaning what's happening out there? Because we also know that supply is not where it's supposed to be, right? So the vacancy is growing, days on market is growing, but we're still told that we're millions and millions of units behind in supply as well. So what's stopping people? Like, have you dug further in to understand a little bit of like, I guess the macroeconomics of what's happening?
Yeah. So not specifically with our data report. Our data report is geared on leasing, but in terms of, my thoughts on the broader real estate market, you're seeing kind of mixed signals right now. But in the home buying market, right, you're seeing general unaffordability. You're seeing still high interest rates, still high home prices. You're starting to see kind of big winner markets and big loser markets, right, where, or I think it was a Realtor.com report, they called them refuge markets. So you see strong markets in the Northeast and the Midwest where things are more affordable, not in the big really expensive cities. And then in the Southwest, the more sprawling cities, you're seeing things really soften, seeing prices drop. But I think overall, nationally, home buying is not affordable, right? Which should keep renters in the renter pool. So why is the renter market still soft, right?
Yeah.
And we have low supply of housing and so I think when you look at it, you really have to look down into your submarket and your regional and then your submarket, because you're seeing some markets that have a supply influx and had huge deliveries of both build to rent single family and luxury multifamily post-COVID. And then those markets are really soft. And I think those very much might be dragging down some of the metrics of more of the supply constrained cities. So I think always looking at your local market to understand it is going to tell you a completely different story than national. But you are seeing these different dynamics in different regions of the U.S.
Yeah, and obviously we're going to focus on the leasing side within our own industry, but it's always interesting to see how all of the real estate industry marketplace together. And I'm glad you brought up kind of the home ownership piece and the home buying. Mm-hmm. People with low interest rates are locked in. They're not moving anywhere. So that creates
I'm not going anywhere.
Right? Same. Right? You are. You're kind of stuck in some ways because of interest rates where other people can't get in because of interest rates. And and I do agree. I think the cost to build multifamily is so high that only Class A really is coming into the market.
Yep.
So those, I think, are the properties that are struggling the most, typically with occupancy and days on market, where your B and C class probably are doing a little bit better.
Yeah.
But rents are still flat, right? Because it's just the market's a little bit of a gridlock right now.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. So we do break down our data by rental rate range. And so you can see in terms of market share, the $2,500 and more range is growing in terms of its share of the market. So it's now, I think it's gone up 10% over the last few years in terms of market share. So it's this delivery of high-end luxury rentals. And so we see that. And then we see a decline in the under $1,500. But that also might just be a reflection of general inflation, right? That can't get that much for $800 anymore.
That's right.
So you see things, you essentially see this market share grow up in terms of into more expensive units. But when you break it down by days on market, our highest days on market are actually the mid tier. So from $1,500 to $2,500, and then $2,500 plus is actually the lowest days on market. So the luxury there's high demand for, and they're moving quickly. It's this mid tier that is almost like evaporating. And then we see an increased demand for the under 1,500 units. And I think that's actually telling a story about the macro economy of the U.S., which is that there's this wealth disparity. So we're seeing it in our data, right? You're seeing movement on the low end, and you're seeing movement on the high end, and you're seeing a really slowness, softness in the mid tier. So that's that kind of tells the story of what's happened in the U.S. economy in this wealth disparity.
Yeah, that is really interesting to understand that. Again, I would have thought it was more of the Class A and so forth that was going to see some softening just because of affordability. But to your point, if there is kind of that soft middle class, right, that's actually where we're seeing some of those increased days on market. Well, that's really, really interesting. So I want to dive into another stat that you shared. So you talked about that lead efficiency piece, right? Getting from a lead to a showing.
Yep.
And that you are seeing increases in that over time on your platform. So I want to talk about, well, obviously we can talk about the ShowMojo and Tenant Turner platforms and how they help. But in general, what are people that are being successful? What are they doing to be successful? Because there's always winners and losers in every market. And you can look at these stats and there'll be people that are listening to this and they'll say, yep, those stats represent what I'm seeing. And other people will say, no, not at all. I'm outperforming all of these stats. So what are those outperformers doing right now?
Yeah, I think the key is to automate relentlessly. So like I said earlier, 65% of prospects rent with the first PM to respond to them. This is where automation can help you, because the number one complaint for leasing teams is that they're on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Who wants to answer their phone at 7 p.m. in the middle of dinner? But they feel this pressure like they have to. And it's not just a gut feeling. They're right? That prospect will rent with somebody else when you don't answer their phone call. So I think the way you win is through automation. If you can't answer the phone at night on the weekends, how do you replicate that experience so that prospect can continue to move through your funnel? And so you do that with automation, where you're automatically texting them upon inquiry. You're sending them through pre-qualification and to self-scheduling flows, so that they're not waiting from Tuesday night till Wednesday morning when your staff comes in to respond to their email. And then you're not losing time as you volley back and forth on, are you free at 2 p.m. on Thursday? No, 1 p.m., right? Like that, nobody wants to do that anymore. Nobody wanted to do that ever. But I think if you drive them to a calendar, to a scheduled showing, you get them hooked, and then you say, are you qualified to be a renter here? Do you hit the requirements? Are these policies okay? They will show up to your showing within 24 to 48 hours, and they are a primed, qualified prospect. And you set the tone of how you, as a PM, are communicating with them, which is efficiently and quickly moving forward. So it's a great way to start the relationship off, and it's something that's going to drive that conversion rate and push those prospects through your funnel to a successful lease. And essentially, you need to beat your competitors to the punch there.
And that really goes for really any sales, right? It's always how quickly are you responding to that lead? Yep. How are you providing resources and letting them kind of dictate the pace that they want to move through it. Mm-hmm. The property management world is very interesting. The rental housing market is so unique in the fact that we know that the inquiries are coming in at nights on the weekends, yet that's not really when we do a good job staffing. Mm-hmm. And I And I don't want people to have to answer the phone at 9 o'clock at night. I don't think any of us do.
No.
So, but we have technology that can help solve all of these gaps, which is really, really exciting and helpful. Now, when we think about the qualifying process, you kind of talked about making sure that person shows up to the tour and they're qualified. What pieces of the qualification are you doing pre-tour?
Yeah, so that is completely up to the PM and their settings within the system. But it can be income, it could be number of people living in the unit, your pet policy, and then also handling all of that with automation, but always having a route to a person when there is extenuating circumstances of something where judgment needs to occur. So all leads go to the PM. Some are automatically scheduled and others require this personal touch and use of judgment on whether you want to schedule that showing and, get that prospect into a lease with you. So I think that's the key, is always having that path to a human and to be able to make exceptions. But really in terms of, the world is your oyster in terms of what questions you can ask during a pre-qualification process and what you can program into automation.
Yeah, because there's really nothing worse than for the applicant and the PM for somebody to show up for a tour that doesn't meet the requirements, or they have a pet and you don't allow pets, whatever it might be that would cause friction. And thanks for bringing up that part about always having a path to the PM. With kind of the rise in like AI and automation, a common phrase we're hearing a lot right now is human in the loop, right?
Yes.
How do you keep the human in the loop? Not necessarily controlling everything or dictating things, but there's a human available when you need. There's always exceptions. There's always these things that we need to step in on. And that's really important for people. And when I talk to a lot of operators, especially I would say the mid-sized, not necessarily the enterprise, but mid-sized to large operators, they still want their team involved.
Yeah.
And they want that level of care and attention and personal touch. They believe that's part of their brand and part of how they help their residents. And so anytime you start talking about too much automation, sometimes they pull back a little bit because they're like, well, no, we still have a team that we want involved. So I think it's really built, it sounds like, in a way that is friendly to kind of both sides of the coin there.
Yeah, we always have a route to that person, right? So whether that is asking for an operator if you're on a phone call, or being able to access the PM through different routes on your text or email chains, you should always be able to get to a person. But I do think, most people, like most renters, which are millennials and Gen Z now, they want self-service. And they actually will abandon if they can't self-service. Or I've been using this example. So I'm an elder millennial, but I missed a pediatrician appointment I have 3 kids. So things start falling through the cracks. So I missed one, and they don't have online scheduling. And I was like, there's a chance that this kid never goes back to the pediatrician, right? Like, I cannot make this phone call and get this scheduled. It is the number one, like, painful thing on my personal list of to-dos that I cannot handle. I was like, if I had self-scheduling, I would miss that appointment. I would realize I missed that appointment, and I would immediately reschedule for the next available spot. And that kid would be at the pediatrician, right? Instead, I have to be like, to my husband, I'm like, please remind me, like, let's put little Post-its around the house. So I think like that self-service component is so big. And then for the people who don't want that, they can reach you still. They can still get through. They're not you don't want them caught in a loop of automation or AI. If it's not working for them, it's not getting them the answer, you need to escalate to the right path.
Yeah, and that example is great. I love personal examples because it does speak to that need of self-service. And you're absolutely right. People want self-service until you don't, right? And what's great when you offer tools like that is most people will just self-serve. They'll schedule. Your pediatrician should get online scheduling, because then when somebody does need to talk to somebody, the person that's in that office is actually available to help, right? Because picking up the phone and scheduling that next visit is not the highest value work. It just isn't, right?
No.
And nobody really wants to do that on
They
the
do
other
it on
end either.
paper. They still have a paper calendar there.
That's wild. Somebody should walk in and sell them some software, right? Because they're a prime target for software. But our applicants, our residents are no different. They want to be able to reach the PM when it's really important. When it's something very, very simple, just let me take care of it myself.
Yes.
We're all busy 8 to 6 every single day. But, when I'm really available before 8 a.m., when I'm really available after 6 p.m., because I can take that time to go on and just take care of it myself.
Otherwise you'll have 50 emails that are you free at 2 p.m. on Thursday? And you'll miss the one that needs the special judgment, that needs to talk it out, that needs to have a conversation and isn't your, cut and dry prospect. And your team's going to be inundated with noise. So can you remove the noise to let them provide exceptional experience and exceptional service in the cases that require it?
So what are some of the other things that the top performers are doing to beat those market averages? As far as, obviously you're allowing them to self-serve, get in there, schedule things, kind of move things down the road a little bit on their own. Anything else as far as removing friction and creating a better applicant and resident experience?
I think self-showing is the next part of that funnel, right? They're scheduled, they're qualified. How are you conducting the showing? And I think there is a lot of nuance to that, right? It is market specific. It is property specific. Would you allow someone to access your unit unaccompanied? But I think in a huge number of cases, the answer is and should be yes. And what self-showings does for your leasing funnel is it doubles the number of showings that you get. And right now, when leads are at their all-time low, you want to double your showings, right? So if self-showings make sense for your market and that property, it is a great way to widen that funnel in order to ultimately reduce those days on market. So I think that one's key. And I think the second part of that is doing that in a safe and secure way. So if you are, I've talked to customers who are I was doing self-showings 20 years ago. And they were they would come in the office, I'd give them the key, I'd take their ID, and they'd go see the space and come back. And I think depending on what market you're at, that worked really well. But obviously fraud has escalated. The sophistication of fraudsters has escalated. So the way to do self-showings in a low-risk way is by layering technology that blocks those fraudsters at many different points along the path. So you want to be, screening out VoIP calling, suspicious IPs, have really robust identity verification so you know that this is a real person with a real ID, that you have information on them. And then is that same person who scheduled the showing the one attending the showing, right? So you can do selfie ID verification, which we have coming soon on our platforms. We do geofencing so that we know that they are on site at their scheduled window. And then also there's new layers of fraud protection on the listing side. So not only could that prospect be a fraudster, but of course there's people impersonating you as the PM or landlord. And so blocking that as well, both through, we have a fraud acknowledgement form, so raising awareness of that so that when a prospect comes to schedule a showing, you say you should only be communicating through these channels and not these other ones that might have pre-existing relationships built, and saying, send me money through PayPal or whatever means, cash. And then also the actual detection of those false listings and getting them taken off the web. So all of those layers of protection help you double the number of showings by offering self-showings. So I think there's this delicate balance of how do you do self-showings, how do you increase your leads while also continuing to mitigate the risk of letting people into your units unaccompanied.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up fraud because, yes, we are all seeing an increase in fraud across the board. And then, so when you think about this idea of a self-showing, again, a lot of people might say it seems risky because of the increase in fraud. But there are a lot of tools, a lot of features that are built into these platforms to help prevent that. And so I love talking about that piece because I do think that self-showings are really powerful, not only for the increased leads, and I think you said, or showings, double your showings, right?
Yeah.
Which, again, in a market where things are a little more uncertain, a little slower, that's a huge advantage over your competitors. But I also think it creates a really great applicant experience for somebody to be able to go into that property on their own, by themselves, and just stand there and kind of envision living there. And there is a little bit of this freedom that I think that you feel. I know, like, my comparison would be if you are buying a car, right? Yeah. Whether or not the salesperson goes with you on the test drive, I think really changes your experience in that test drive. When you feel like you're being watched, right? You feel uncomfortable.
Versus let you free.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So we see customers utilize the platform in a number of different ways. We see people do hybrid where they do both accompanied and self-showings, so that if your calendar's not open, they can default to a self-showing, or you can do it based on preference too. We do see slightly higher conversion rates from a showing to an application with accompanied showings versus self-showings, but it's this balance of volume, right? If you're getting just, single-digit differences in conversion rates, then having that double the volume is going to increase your overall conversion rate. So I think we see customers use it in a lot of different creative ways. We see, multifamily customers with an on-site leasing agent or property manager still use self-showings, right? Probably to your point, they can take them around. They're on site, but there's other things they could be doing, and that prospect can get the experience without somebody looking over their shoulder. So I think it's determining what is best for your market, for your property, and enabling that to be done in a seamless way.
Yeah, we live in such a fun time because this idea of preference and choice is so prevalent that through technology, not only can the PM operate the way that they want, but the applicant resident can kind of choose their preferences. It goes all the way from the self-showing to when they apply, to even how they get communicated to, right? Give me a call, give me a text, give me an email. We have all these preferences that we get to choose where that experience is customized across the board. So I think that's really fun. Well, I want to make sure we talk about, I guess, ShowMojo specifically as a platform and Tenant Turner as a platform and these tools to make sure that, our listeners understand what this is all about and how this plays together. I think we've hinted along the way about different features and stuff that are in the platform, but go ahead and dive in a little bit deeper about those platforms, how you're helping people, especially in consideration of the stats that we've talked about today.
Yeah. So the area that we cover is really from the time you have an available listing until the time you have a signed lease. So that's where our technology filters in and helps support your team. So it starts with syndication. So you would essentially syndicate to ShowMojo or Tenant Turner, or enable the integration between Rent Manager and our platforms. And then we will syndicate out to the various ILSs on your behalf. From there, you're getting a unique phone number and email address. All inquiries are going to be captured through the software. This will then, once they express initial interest, it will text them, email them in order to push them into that self-scheduling and pre-qualification process. Then we enable the self-showings or, to the point earlier, accompanied showings as well, but enabling managing those calendars, managing your drive times, clustering your showings, lots of different preferences that you may have, and then nurturing that lead post-showing to push them into an application. So really optimizing that funnel from the time of inquiry into the time they sign a lease. So that's where our platforms play. What was the second part of your question?
Well, and just how all of that is so important in relation to all of these trends that we're seeing, right? With the days on market being up and leads are down. Like, why is it that your platforms are so important right now?
I think there's a lot of reasons. So first is that speed to a lead, which is, automate that initial response so that your prospects are hearing from you first. Our platforms enable that. I think secondly, when things are really tight and the leasing market is soft, it helps you, it reduces your need to hire additional headcount as you take on more units, because it keeps your team really efficient. So for your leasing team, the number of units per employee will go up. So they'll be able to handle more units. And then I think third is it will actually improve your customer service and support, because to the point earlier, we're going to remove tons of phone calls and emails that are really stating the mundane, right? That are scheduling, where you're asking the same 3 or 4 pre-qualification questions over and over. That will all be handled by the software, which means that the contact that you are getting from a customer are ones that need this higher level of support and service and need a judgment, which is where your team will shine, right? They'll actually be able to provide the support needed and not lose that in the noise of all of that, right? Of the scheduling, showings, also reduction in no-shows. You're not going to be waiting at the door. We're confirming appointments on your behalf. So you're not standing at the front door if you're doing accompanied showings waiting for someone who's never going to come. So all of that leads to a better leasing operation. So more cost effective and higher conversion, which should reduce your days on market overall.
Yeah, that's great. And I really appreciate this idea of like how to scale your company. You kind of mentioned you can add more units without adding more staff. And when you don't really know what rent's going to do, when you really don't know what the days on market will do, you're doing your best to work on all those things, but you're still trying to scale your business, add units and so forth. You have to have a way to do that efficiently that protects your business as a business owner and an operator. So the idea of adding technology that at least maybe slows down the staff addition, right?
Yeah.
You can add hundreds of more units or thousands of more units without having to go out and really bulk up your staff. Allows you that flexibility to kind of grow into that size and stay efficient the whole way while creating these better experiences. So I think it's really exciting, this idea. Again, I love analogies and comparisons. It reminds me of using online reservations for a restaurant, right? You made the comment about the no-shows and the reminders. I use OpenTable frequently, right? And I love when I get the text message the day beforehand earlier that day, like, are you still going to be there, right? Let us know. Can we expect you tonight? I like that reminder, right? And it's that opportunity to say like, you know what, actually, no, I'm not going to make it. So they don't have to hold that table for me. Or yes, I'm going to be there. It gives me reassurance that they'll be there, right? Because also the applicant's probably wondering like, are they really going to show up? Are they really going to be there?
I hope they're not too concerned about that, but yes.
Yeah.
Right. And then they don't forget about the appointment too, because they're getting these series of reminders. It's being confirmed. So really, we communicate with, if you show occupied units, we communicate with your current tenant as well.
Oh, wonderful.
So they can confirm, cancel, or reschedule showings if they no longer can enable you to access the unit at that time.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, Vanessa, if people want to learn more about ShowMojo, this data that we talked about, or the Tenant Turner platform, what are the best ways for them to reach out, stay up to date, possibly connect with you, things like that?
Yeah. So there's a few links that I can provide you, Joe, to go in the notes, but it's helloshowmojo.com, tenantturner.com, and then also I put a lot of updates on LinkedIn. So I would invite any of you to follow me on LinkedIn or connect with me directly on LinkedIn. And that way you can stay in the loop with our upcoming product roadmap and product enhancements and a lot of exciting things that we have going on in 2026.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We'll definitely drop all of those links in the show notes. And I would even call out this report that you put together with the Show Mojo data. It is a quarterly report. There's so much value, especially when you're looking at it quarter after quarter, understanding what's slowing down, what's speeding up, what's changing compared to your own data. It's really insightful information. So I really appreciate that your team takes the time to put that data together, because obviously you don't have to do that. You're doing that for the industry. We appreciate it. We learn a lot about it every time we tune in for it.
Yeah, we have one coming up in late April for Q1. And I think we have a lot of really exciting new visualizations. So heat maps, new metrics, some really cool things that will be new and different to the Data Talk if you guys are regular attendees of that. But I would definitely suggest tuning in for that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, Vanessa, thank you for the time today. This has been really insightful, and I'm sure our audience will love this.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, Joe.
Yeah, thanks again. And thank you to our audience for joining us for another episode. And until next time, keep going beyond rent.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Beyond Rent. If you enjoyed this podcast, spread the word on social media and with your peers in the industry. To be notified when more episodes are released, subscribe using your favorite podcast player. Beyond Rent is brought to you by Rent Manager Property Management Software. Learn more about Rent Manager's industry-leading software solutions at rentmanager.com. Until next time, keep going beyond rent.